Hello, I'm continuing my reviews on the Star Wars series with Return of the Jedi. Now, Return of the Jedi is the third and final film of the original Star Wars trilogy. Now, this wasn't the final Star Wars film because years later George Lucas would do a trilogy of prequels, and now you have the current lineup of Star Wars movies from Disney. But it's the final film of the original series, and for a lot of people, this was sort of the black sheep of the Star Wars franchise, at least until the prequels came along. But I'll be honest, growing up, this was actually my favorite Star Wars movie. This was the one I watched the most when I was a little kid, and I kind of feel like that's probably because this is the one I think is the most accessible to little kids. But yeah, when I was a little kid, I absolutely adored this one, and this was my favorite for the longest time. Now, as an adult, I would say that Empire Strikes Back is definitely my favorite, but as a little kid, this one was my favorite. And as an adult, I can definitely say that this is the weakest of the original trilogy, but I still really love this movie. Now, don't get me wrong, it has a lot of flaws. I think it's definitely the most flawed of the original series, but I still really enjoy the hell out of this film. Yes, the movie is not as well written as Empire Strikes Back was. The stakes are nowhere near as high, or at least they don't feel as high as they did in the previous film. And also you have the Ewoks, and yeah, I know the Ewoks were clearly just made to sell toys, and maybe it's because I liked them when I was a little kid, but I'm gonna be honest, and this might destroy all my credibility, but I like those little mutant koala bears, I really do. Yes, it's the weakest of the original series, but I love it all the same. And I will say, because this is the one I watched the most growing up, this is the one where the special editions made me the most angry. Now, the movie was directed by Richard Margwin, I hope I'm saying his last name right, and it's written by Lawrence Kasdan and George Lucas. Now, prior to Richard Margwin getting the job at directing this movie, Lucas actually offered David Lynch a chance to direct this movie. The same David Lynch who directed movies like Eraserhead and The Elephant Man, and would go on to direct movies like Dune, Blue Velvet, Lost Highway, and he also created the show Twin Peaks. He was actually offered a chance to direct this movie, but he turned it down because he admitted that he had absolutely no interest, but he was flattered that Lucas would offer him the chance to do it, though. But it really makes you wonder what it would have been like if David Lynch had actually directed this movie. I'm guessing it probably would have been even darker than Empire Strikes Back. And it probably would have been something like his adaptation of Dune, which he did the year after. However, I do have a feeling that he probably would have been handcuffed by Lucas. Like, I don't think he would have been allowed to do what he really would have wanted to do, I think. Now, the movie was originally going to be titled Revenge of the Jedi, and I heard, and I don't know if this was just sort of a apocryphal story, but I heard it was actually a fan who pointed out to George Lucas saying that Jedis wouldn't seek revenge, so the title was changed to Return of the Jedi. Now, the plot of Return of the Jedi is it picks up where Empire Strikes Back left off. Now, Empire Strikes Back ended where Han was captured by the Empire and frozen in carbonite and sent off to an alien gangster named Jabba the Hutt because Han owed money to him. And Luke found out that Darth Vader was his father. So, at the beginning of this film is really about our heroes trying to get Han back from Jabba the Hutt, and the beginning part of this film takes place on Tatooine, which is Luke Skywalker's home planet, but it's also the planet that Jabba the Hutt is from, and all the stuff taking place at Jabba's palace almost feels like its own separate story in a lot of ways. But they eventually do get Han back and defeat Jabba the Hutt. And the rest of the movie from then on is about the rebellion finding out out that the Empire is constructing a new Death Star, and it turns out that the Emperor himself, basically the evil dictator that the entire Empire bows down to, is overseeing the construction of this new Death Star. So the rebellion's now trying to destroy it, but it's being protected by a shield which is being generated by a shield generator on this moon called Endor. So our heroes go to this moon to try to destroy the shield generator, and they meet these bear-like aliens called the Ewoks, who end up being major allies in their fight against the Empire. But in the film, Luke Skywalker is dealing with the fact that Darth Vader is his father, and he believes that there's still goodness in Darth Vader, and he believes that he could pull his father away from the dark side, but it turns out that the Emperor essentially wants to replace Darth Vader with Luke Skywalker and make Luke his right-hand man. So in the film you see this conflict of Luke trying to bring his father back over to the light side, whereas Vader is trying to bring Luke over to the dark side. In the movie, Mark Hamill once again reprises his role as Luke Skywalker, and he is really good in the movie, and it is really cool to see Luke finally become a badass Jedi Knight, even though his ultimate test is really fighting his own father by the end of the film. In the movie, Carrie Fisher once again reprises her role as Leia, and she's also really good in the movie. And Leia is still a badass in this film, even when she ends up getting captured by Jabba and chained up and forced to wear that rather revealing garb. She still ends up overpowering Jabba, which you know is something he was not expecting. And this is also where you get that reveal that Luke and Leia are actually brother and sister, but they were separated at birth in order to hide them from Darth Vader. Which admittedly, there are some inconsistencies with that, but I'm willing to go with it. And you have that really touching moment where Luke asks Leia if she remembers her mother, and she talks about how her mother was a very sad person, and of course that gets completely pissed away in the prequels. And I will say, you know that the whole idea of Luke and Leia being brother and sister was not planned out, because in Empire Strikes Back you had that scene where Leia kisses Luke in order to piss off Han, and Luke starts gloating about it, and it's like, you realize you're gloating about kissing your sister, dude. But even though you know it wasn't planned, I still think it kind of works for the story, and also you find out that Leia has the potential to become a Jedi herself. In the movie, Harrison Ford once again plays Han Solo, and this is the performance I will say feels kind of phoned in, and that might be because Han was originally supposed to die. He was supposed to die in the beginning of the film to show that there are stakes. And Ford himself thought it was a great idea to kill Han off because he felt like his character's arc was over at that point, and I guess when they decided to let Han live, I think that might have pissed Ford off a little bit, and that's probably why his performance feels a little maybe phoned in isn't really the right term for it, but it definitely feels like his spirit wasn't really in it this time around. He does have a few funny moments, though. Billy Dee Williams once again plays Lando Calrissian. Yoda returns in the film, once again voiced by Frank Oz, and he dies in the movie, and I gotta say, the scene where he dies is actually a really emotional scene. Alec Guinness returns to play the ghost of Obi-Wan Kenobi. In the movie, there's an Ewok named Wicket who ends up befriending Leia, and Wicket was played by a very young Warwick Davis. Warwick Davis would go on to be in movies like Willow and the Leprechaun movies, and he would also return to this franchise playing several different characters. I think he also played Wicket in those made-for-TV movies about the Ewoks. In the movie, David Prowse once again plays Darth Vader, and James Earl Jones once again does the voice for Vader. But at the end of the movie, you see Vader unmasked, and when he gets unmasked, he's played by Sebastian Shaw. Shaw also plays the ghost of Anakin Skywalker, who shows up at the end of the film alongside the ghost of Obi-Wan Kenobi and the ghost of Yoda. Oh, I'm so sorry. That's only if you've seen the original version of this movie, because in the special editions, they replace Sebastian Shaw with Hayden Christensen to sort of tie in with the prequels, but I'll talk about that more when I talk about the special editions. But Vader has a very interesting and very compelling arc in this film, and for all this movie's faults, I think this movie really does a good job at making Vader a character that you've hated in the first two movies into a very three-dimensional character. And you really see him find redemption by the end of the film. In the film, Ian McDiarmid plays the Emperor, who ends up being the main villain of the movie, and one of the things that's really interesting about this whole series, or at least the original trilogy, is they really do sort of build the Emperor up. The Emperor is mentioned in the first film, and he makes a brief appearance in the second film, but this is where you really see him full force, and he really is the main antagonist of the film. Vader in this film really becomes more of a secondary antagonist. And one criticism that you could make about the Emperor in this movie is he does kind of come off like a Saturday cartoon villain in a lot of ways. Like, in a lot of ways, he's almost stereotypically evil. And compared to Darth Vader, he's very two-dimensional. But I think what really makes it work is really Ian McDiarmid's performance in this movie, and also I feel like the Emperor in a lot of ways is almost supposed to represent the devil in a way. Like, he's almost like the embodiment of evil, like he's the physical manifestation of the dark side itself. Like, that's kind of how I read his character. But yeah, despite its flaws, I do enjoy Return of the Jedi quite a bit. I do think it's the weakest of the original trilogy, but I still think it's a good movie. Now, oddly enough, even though this is not a horror film, all the scenes at Jabba's palace, for some reason, have always appealed to me as a horror fan. Like, Jabba the Hutt is honestly a pretty horrifying character when you stop to think about it, especially if you see the original versions of the original trilogy. Like, don't watch the special editions, because that's something I think Lucas really fucked up with, is he added that scene with Jabba the Hutt in the first movie, which really destroys the tension, because one of the things that makes Hutt kind of creepy is, like, he's built up throughout these movies, kind of like the Emperor. He's mentioned in the first movie, and he's mentioned in the second movie, and in this film you finally see him, and he's this horrifying, slug-like creature. But of course, if you watch the special editions of these movies, that build-up to Jabba the Hutt is completely ruined, and the special editions honestly kind of made him kind of a joke. That's why I gotta say, if you can, if you have access to them, see the original versions of Star Wars. Don't watch the special editions. Unfortunately, I know for a lot of people, the special editions are probably the only ones available. And also the Rancor, which is this creature that Jabba the Hutt keeps in this dungeon underneath his palace, is one of the great movie monsters, in my opinion. And also, it's a really creepy scene where you first get hints of this creature, where Jabba the Hutt drops that alien girl into the dungeon, and you don't see what's happening to her. All you hear is her screaming, and all the other aliens at Jabba's palace looking down, seeing what's happening to her. And also that scene where Luke and that pig-like guard get dropped into the dungeon is actually a really good horror scene. Even though this isn't a horror movie, that scene plays out like a scene from a horror film. And even though it's not a human creature, I honestly felt really bad for that guard getting eaten by the Rancor, because you hear the fear in its voice, and you feel the fear coming off that character, even though you can't actually understand what it's saying. And then the scene where C-3PO and R2-D2 see all those droids being tortured is kind of a creepy scene as well, even though the scene is somewhat played up for laughs. And also you had the Sarlacc Pit Sequence, which, as a little kid, that scene was so iconic to me, and I thought the whole idea of the Sarlacc Pit was so cool and so terrifying at the same time, because the implications of what happens to you when you get eaten by the Sarlacc Pit really are terrifying. And I do love the Sarlacc Pit scene, even though it has that infamous moment where Boba Fett dies in a really pathetic way. Now I just want to talk a little bit about the special edition of this movie. Now, I did not harp too much on the special editions in my reviews of the first two movies, because, frankly, I did not watch the special editions for these reviews. I actually managed to watch the original versions of the Star Wars trilogy. But when I was a little kid, I had the original trilogy on VHS, but somewhere around 2004 or 2005, this box set was released, and I got it for either my birthday or Christmas or something, and when I was a little kid, I was like, oh boy, I have the Star Wars movies on DVD! I don't need these VHSs anymore, and I got rid of my VHS tapes of the original trilogy. Then I didn't watch these movies for years after that, and then at some point when I was like 17, I wanted to show my little sister the Star Wars movies, and since Return of the Jedi was always my favorite growing up, I decided to show her that one first, even though in retrospect, I probably should have just shown her the whole series from the beginning. So we started watching Return of the Jedi, and then I started noticing the special editions, and my heart sank a lot, especially when it occurred to me that I got rid of the old VHS tapes, which meant that I had no way of seeing the original versions of Star Wars. Yeah. I died a little bit inside. Like, I definitely think I threw up a little bit in my mouth when I saw this CGI abomination dancing around Jabba's palace. And of course, I already mentioned how iconic the Sarlacc Pit scene was for me, and one of the things I thought was so cool about the Sarlacc Pit was, basically it was just this creature that was sitting in the sand with its mouth open, and there was sort of this implication that it was somehow a part of the sand as well. But seeing those, like, teeth on the side of the pit clearly indicated that this was the creature's mouth, but there was sort of the implication that maybe there was something else down there as well if you went deeper into the creature's mouth, but a lot of that was left up for the viewer's interpretation. But then in the special edition, they add this horrible freaking Little Shop of Horrors motherfucker in the Sarlacc Pit, and it's like, wow, you completely ruined a scene that was so iconic to me as a little kid. Thanks, Lucas. And then, of course, they replaced Sebastian Shaw with Hayden Christensen as the ghost of Anakin Skywalker, which I thought was so disingenuous to Sebastian Shaw. Now, I understand why they did it to a certain extent. I don't agree with it, but I understand why they did it to sort of tie in more with the prequels, and I guess they were kind of going for this idea that they wanted to show Anakin Skywalker, the ghost of Anakin Skywalker, as he was before the dark side corrupted him. But to me it works so much better showing the older Anakin Skywalker, because it shows you what he could have been had he not become Darth Vader. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of other fuck-ups that were done to this movie with the special edition, but it's been a long time since I've actually watched the special edition of Return of the Jedi. I did manage to, once again, see the original version of this movie, because a few years ago, and I'm actually not even sure if I should be showing this because this is technically a bootleg, but I got this, the Star Wars trilogy, the Despecialized edition, and basically this is the original versions of the original trilogy. And really, if you can, if you have access to them, see the original versions of the Star Wars trilogy. Don't watch the special editions. Unfortunately, I'm sure for a lot of younger people, the special editions is probably what they know. And you know what? If they grew up with the special editions, That's fine, but I also feel really bad for them as well. I think you should really seek out the original versions of these movies. And frankly, it's the original versions of the Star Wars trilogy that have become culturally significant, not the special editions. So that concludes my reviews of the original Star Wars trilogy. Now I am going to be reviewing the prequels and the Disney Star Wars films, but let's just say that my praise for those movies, with a few exceptions, is not going to be as high as my praise for this original trilogy. I hope you guys like this Star Wars meme I found. Admittedly, the joke in this meme might be a little dated at this point, but I had this meme on my computer for a couple of years now, and I just wanted to show it because I still think it's pretty funny. But now I'm going to cut to a bunch of short reviews that some friends of mine did on this movie. I call them short reviews, but actually some of them are pretty long. Pretty much the rest of this video is going to be the other reviews that my friends did on this movie.
Now when it comes to Return of the Jedi, because as you know, according to George Lucas, Jedi don't actually get revenge, they just return. Haha. Nerdy cringe humor. I always wonder if this is a really good film or if this is a bad film but I just enjoy it because of nostalgic reasons. Now the reason I say that is because when you break down the story, when you break down the script, when you break down the acting, when you break down the overall structure of the film, you really start to see the flaws. You know, the script is just a basic Star Wars script. I mean, none of the scripts are actually really good. They should be Shakespearean, but they're not because, you know, it's a more, you know, dialogue is very simple and it just kind of moves the story along, which is fine, but still, you know, it should be better than it is. The story itself, you know, it's not that original. I mean, if you watch the fourth one and the fifth one, you kind of see the same things returning in this one. And of course, those films had the advantage of, wow, this is new, this is original, this is new mythology, this is stuff we've never seen before. You know, the fourth one especially had that because this was the first Star Wars film. We'd never seen Jedi before. We'd never seen these characters before. We've never seen this universe. And then the fifth one had the darkness that really should have been the way, you know, the tone that the entire sixth film had. But of course it didn't because it took a more lighter tone. So it loses the advantage on that as well. Yes, there are dark scenes in it, especially when Luke is battling Darth Vader in the ending. Spoiler alert for a 40-year-old film. But overall the film is a lot lighter toned, which we already saw in the fourth one as well, because the fourth one is very campy. It's more like a Buck Rogers story. But even then, it's, like I said, it's new. We had never seen this before. And then, of course, when you break down the acting, you know, the acting it's okay. I mean, we have great performances from the man who plays Darth Sidious. Forgive me for forgetting his name, but I think that's a great performance. Yes, his dialogue is a little silly, but I love that performance. I think he gives it his all. Of course, James Earl Jones, my boy, really kills it as Darth Vader, as always. The man inside the suit, I forget his name as well. Forgive me again. He really embodied Darth Vader. He made it. He really worked with James Earl Jones's voice, if you know what I mean. Like it went together well. Just like in the fifth one when he's telling Luke that he's his father. That whole scene. I mean, it's amazing the way he just embodied that character. But overall, the acting is not that great. Excuse me. You know, Mark Hamill's okay. He's not great. He's not as great as he is in other performances, I think. I think the Joker is his best performance. But he's good. He carries the film along. You know, he has presence. He has charisma. Leia, the same thing. You know, Carrie Fisher. You know, Han Solo, same thing. But overall, the acting is not that great. Structure of the film, I really wish it had taken some chances, because if you know the story, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. If you know the original story of what George Lucas had planned for this film, you were going to get a much darker tone. You were going to get the death of Han Solo. You were going to get Luke walking off into the sunset like if it was an old Western film. You were going to get a battle with Wookiees instead of teddy bears at the ending, and that would have made it a lot darker, because you can do a lot more darker things with Wookiees, I think. You could get a lot more death. You can get a lot more violence, and not that I love violence and gore and all that stuff. I mean, I do, but it just would have felt more like a battle. It would have felt more like a war instead of a cutesy thing that they did at the ending. And also it would have felt more like a fitting conclusion to this story instead of just kind of wrapping up the whole thing in a nice, neat little bow. Now, with that said, I don't want to make this sound like it's a rant. I actually love this film. As I mentioned before, I love this film to death. I grew up watching this film. I watch this film a few times a year, especially along with the other ones, because you cannot watch part 4 and 5 without watching part 6. You have to end the story. And it is cool to see some of the things that happen in this film. It is cool to see the end of Jabba the Hutt. Yes, you get that idea of why didn't Han just go back at the end of the 4th film with the money to give it to Jabba so that way this whole thing didn't happen. But anyway, that's just a plot hole that we'll just have to forgive. It is cool to see Darth Vader and Luke come to this final battle of good and evil, where Luke is struggling with the dark side and Vader is struggling with the light side, and Sidious is this shadow that's just, seducing both of them and manipulating them to do what he wants. That's really cool, especially if you're a fanboy like me, to see that. It is cool when you get Leia telling Han that, she knows he loves her the way he told her in part 5. That's a really cute scene. And it is cool to see, Lando driving the Millennium Falcon, all this fanboy stuff that, if you're a fanboy, you will love. And overall, I love this film. Yes, it has the problems, and I just had to get that out the way because, you can't fanboy too much. I can't anyway, you kind of got to be, I got to be a little bit honest about it. But at the same time, I always forgive that, and I can still watch the film. I love this film. If you're a Star Wars fan, definitely watch this film, especially if you haven't seen it. I mean, where have you been all this time? You should definitely watch this one, especially if you watch the prequels. I'm not going to talk about them too much because I don't want my blood pressure to rise, but you should watch this film. It's a great film. It's a beautiful film. George Lucas is a very creative person. He's a genius when it comes to creating these worlds and stuff like that. Yes, I feel that other people did a better job with his work than he did, but I do feel that I still feel that we should appreciate him and honor him as the creator of Star Wars. He is amazing. I love him to death. I really wish I could meet him one day. I just love this film. I hate to just sound like a broken record, but it's really fun to watch. I enjoy watching it. I geek out. If you're watching with friends, family, whoever it is that they love Star Wars too. It's just really fun to geek out. And also another thing you can do, which I didn't even think about until now. If you have little kids who are watching this film, who've never seen Star Wars before, they'll appreciate it a lot more, I think, because to them this is gonna still be new. This is still gonna be the story that they're being introduced to, and you can give them little plot twists. And I say that for the 5th one as well. When you find out that Darth Vader is Luke's father, just to see their reactions would be great. I would love to see that, a kid, experiencing Star Wars for the first time. You know what I mean? And yeah, overall, this is a great film, and I do enjoy it as a fan. I definitely think everybody should watch this. I really wish that they would one day, put them all back in theaters just one more time and just kind of have like a fan meet with all the actors or something like that. I don't know if we could afford that, obviously, because I think that would be a little too much money. But it'd be cool to see that. Or at least put them out in regular theaters again, just kind of like an anniversary thing. I don't know if they've ever done that before, but it'd be cool to see that. And yeah, this is a great film. I enjoy it to death. Whether that's for nostalgic reasons, at the end of the day, I guess it doesn't really matter now that I think about it. But this is fantastic. Definitely go watch Return of the Jedi, not Revenge of the Jedi, and have a good time.
Hey everybody, I am back once again. Christian asked me to do reviews on the Star Wars trilogy, as you know, and here I am for the final bit for the original trilogy, Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Man, Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi is... man, it's definitely not the best of the trilogy, of the original trilogy, I have to say. The story kind of feels like a combination. I don't even want to say a combination. They took elements from the original two movies and just kind of combined them together. They kind of took a little bit of the dark elements from Empire, with like the Emperor, the whole Darth Vader Emperor versus Luke kind of felt like something out of Empire. And the Death Star and all that was taken out of A New Hope. It's hard to say because like I used to love Return of the Jedi. In fact, Return of the Jedi, when I was a kid growing up, I actually liked that one the best compared to the other two. But now that I'm older, and just my opinions have changed. Because Return of the Jedi is the quintessential film that has like... You kind of have to get through a lot to get to the good stuff. Because there's good character moments, but there's just not as many as like an Empire. Because Empire just had like the perfect amount. It was just the perfect amount of scenes. It had enough character moments to keep it going and keep you engaged. Where Return of the Jedi, things just kind of slow down and it's just kind of at times. It gets kind of boring at times. It's almost like the Star Wars saturation seeping in a little bit of too much of it. I feel like Return of the Jedi could be cut down a little bit, or at least add a couple more character moment scenes, because there's a lot of talking and planning, which is essential to the plot and everything. Pretty much once you get into Endor, after they save Han, that's when the movie picks up again, because there's just that middle part where Luke goes back to Dagobah and gets some final instruction from Yoda and Obi-Wan. And then he goes back, and then we hear political talk about how we're going to defeat the new Death Star, and then the plan is executed. But pretty much the highlight is Luke versus Darth Vader versus Palpatine, the space battle, destroying the Death Star, and the battle on Endor. Even though teddy bears with crossbows and rocks somehow penetrate stormtrooper armors beyond me, pretty much those three sequences as they start rolling, that's pretty much the highlight of the film. That's where it gets good and entertaining and really well executed, and that's when the writing got really good. Not saying that the previous stuff that happened in the film wasn't badly written or anything. It's just that's where it feels like it starts to get entertaining, because there's just that middle part that's just so bloated with just excess that you could have cut down a lot from.
A lot's riding off this last movie, Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. And how was it compared to Episode 5? Did it live up to anything? in my humble opinion, Episode 6 is not as good as the first two. That doesn't mean it's bad at all. I think it's very good. But I guess it didn't really have... I guess, I'm trying to put into words, I don't think it was as well thought out as the other two. The first movie established everything very well. The second movie added layers. And the third movie was a great film, don't get me wrong, but it just kind of wanted to, end things. But I am very forgiving with this movie. People will bitch and complain about Luke being overpowered at the beginning, the Ewoks, it can get silly at times, but it's a really solid movie still, especially compared to what we get later. We'll get to that, but Return of the Jedi, I need to clarify, is a good movie. So we start off with Jabba's palace and Luke pretty much mastering his powers, his Jedi Force powers, almost overnight. Honestly, I think it's cool. It was cool seeing him really work his powers, seeing the gang get Han Solo back from being frozen. The fight when Leia chokes out Jabba, that was refreshing. Boba Fett sort of dies like a bitch, which is disappointing because he looked cool and you thought, at the very least, he died cool, but what you gonna do? So, as I said with Star Wars, with the other two movies, that always has a very great setting and always explores great new worlds. This movie definitely delivers with that. I'm just gonna say the Ewok land. I know the name. It's on the tip of my tongue. I'm embarrassed and ashamed. Ewok land. And, fuck, man. Forgetting these names. Let's just say Jabba's palace. So, that much is good. The best part of the movie definitely is the interactions between Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and even the Emperor. You really see a more father and son dynamic, a bit of a struggle. Luke trying to find the good in his father, and the Emperor trying to turn Luke. A lot of very, very grave things being put in this movie, but it's the same movie that has the little teddy bear people single-handedly defeating the stormtroopers, so it does get a little goofy, but it's a very thrilling movie, and it's a very solid conclusion to the trilogy. So although it's not as good as the first two, we still got a lot of great stuff. Some very, very iconic Star Wars moments. And we got It's a Trap. I think that's all we need. Yeah. It's a trap. I don't know what to say. I'm just glad they got, It's a Trap.
So we come to Jedi, which a lot of people feel is the black sheep of the three, because it's sort of it's almost like, this odd kind of remake of New Hope, because if you really go through the motions, it's almost the same stuff happening over and over again. But I think it's really profound because Luke coming into his own as a Jedi, that's really what cements it as kind of distinct from the other two. Him kind of... one of my favorite actors in the franchise is this guy, Sam Witwer. He's the voice of Darth Maul in the Clone Wars cartoons. He was Starkiller in the video games. He pointed out that, it's a really profound moment at the end when Luke kind of like stares down the Emperor and goes, you know what, I'm not going to kill him. He's my father. Bad guy or not, he is my father, and I'm going to honor that. I am a Jedi like my father before me. It was really insane to have there not be a big final battle and just have Luke go, I'm going to follow the Jedi way and just, be a good person and not, like, fall for your bullshit, Like, that really is a crazy, like, emotional, profound moment, and it's something that, as much as, like, the I am your father moment sticks out, it is very, it is very crazy. In comparison to the other two, it really makes that movie stand out in the trilogy, as much as a lot of people feel like it kind of peaked with two. Everybody gives shit about the Ewoks defeating, the Empire, but I think it was meant to be kind of like an obvious metaphor for like the David and Goliath type thing, like, you know, like the little guys win, that sort of thing, with just like sticks and rocks and shit. So yeah, I think it's pretty good. Maybe it's overhated, you could say, but I think there are people kind of like seeing its appeal nowadays, and I really appreciate it because, yeah, you know, the reveal that like Leia's his sister, and as much as there's inconsistencies with the prequels, you know, it's weird, but then again, nobody's really going to give a shit about inconsistencies with the prequels, so yeah, love Return.
So that brings us to Return of the Jedi, a film that I think gets a lot of flack, but I've always loved it. Is it as good as the first two? Probably not. But I think in some ways, it's more akin to the first one, where it's just fun, it's just exciting, and I love the Ewoks. People hate the Ewoks. I think they're just as legitimate alien characters as any other in the series. And I thought that whole battle on their planet, where the Ewoks actually joined in the fighting, I loved all that. The big reveal about the connection between Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker. To me, that didn't have quite the same impact as the reveal in the last film about Darth Vader. But, I could appreciate it. I was happy that she and Han got together. And I did think it was a rousing, thrilling conclusion to that trilogy. And when they were having the big celebration at the end, I felt like celebrating, because I just thought it was a wonderful moment. I liked that they actually gave some conflict to the Darth Vader character and gave him, if not full redemption at the end, gave him a humanizing moment. I thought that worked well, and that little shot near the end where you see, the spirits, if you will, of, Obi-Wan and Yoda and Anakin, I thought, that was a nice emotional moment. I thought it ended on a really high note.
I don't know if some of you fans may or may not agree with me on this, but this is actually my favorite of the series. Not because of the Ewoks. It's not that I don't like them. They're not really terrible, but that's like my least complaint about the film. I love it because of its like best moments of the film, like Luke and Vader talking about how that Vader still has good in him, and also how I didn't see it coming when you think about it, I think each of these Star Wars like films kind of had twists in. Like, I didn't see that Luke and Leia were going to become brother and sister, which that actually kind of makes sense in some ways when you think about it. I also like, what was his name who played the Emperor Palpatine? His name's Ian McDiarmid. The Emperor, great. Oh, he's great. He's like, wow, amazing. Like, he is so bad that he's not a good person.
Now, these next two short reviews are going to require some explanation. If you saw my review of the first Star Wars movie, one of the short reviews I had in there was a review from my friend Bill Burns, who's a college professor, and he actually recorded reviews on Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi as well. But when I was editing my Empire Strikes Back review, I accidentally deleted his footage, and I was very upset with myself. I hit myself, I cut myself, I cried a lot, and I even tried using some satanic dark magic to get the footage back, but no matter how hard I tried, I could not get that footage back, so I went back to him again and asked him if he could record some short reviews on the Star Wars movies again. So since I did that when I was when I was editing my review of Empire Strikes Back, you did not hear a short review of Empire Strikes Back from him in that video. So now I'm going to play his reviews on both Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
Well, for Star Wars fans of my age, which is, being a young person in the early 80s, I don't think there was any more anticipated film than Empire Strikes Back. And again, you have to remember that this was before the internet or social media, where you'd get like daily reports about a movie that was coming out, or information about, where it was filming or what the story might be. I mean, there was nothing. I remember not hearing a word about this movie. So the anticipation, the wondering just built and built and built. And the first thing I even found out about, though, is even a movie coming out was on the back of the Star Wars figures, you could send away for, if you got like proofs of purchase, you could send away for this character Boba Fett, who is this mysterious bounty hunter that was going to be in the new movie. And I was like, what? I couldn't believe it. And that's how I also think that a lot of Star Wars fans my age, their favorite character is Boba Fett, because he was so enigmatic. He was this new character that was coming out. Nobody knew what part he would play in the new movie, but we knew that a new movie was coming out. And when Empire Strikes Back came out, I saw it twice. I saw it the first time I saw it in drive-in with a double feature with Buck Rogers, and then the second time I saw it was just like in a regular theater, and I loved it. I mean, it was an amazing movie. It might not have had the same kind of cultural impact as the first film did, but it had so much drama and action, and it answered some questions, but it also brought up more questions. You have, of course, the kind of the high drama of finding out about Luke's parentage, and so it was just everything I could ever dream about in terms of a film, And I also think it's interesting because the film does a really good job of having two parallel storylines that were both intriguing. Like, I don't think that one storyline in the film is any better than the other, because you have Luke, of course, being trained to become a Jedi, and there's that wonderful scene where he goes down into, that sort of, below the tree, into that sort of almost like cave below, and you have that almost like a Carl Jungian where he faces his shadow side, when Darth Vader comes out, his sort of the unconscious self, or what he could become, what potentially he could sort of, become another Darth Vader. And then, of course, you have the sequences with Han Solo, Leia in the Millennium Falcon being chased by the Imperials. You have that awesome scene where you think they're safe inside the asteroid, but it's actually the giant like worm. So it was just so thrilling to see the film, and it really more than made up for any sort of hesitation I had about wondering if they could do it again, or if this film could be just as good or just as exciting as the first one. The scenes in Bespin are great. Billy Dee Williams is amazing in his role. So it was just, like I said, I loved it. And it's still my favorite out of all of them, not only because of nostalgia, but I also think it's really constructed well, and the performances in the film are great. And again, it has that really great lived-in look that you really feel that you're watching something that really could take place in some other galaxy or some other planet, rather than believing it was on, some kind of stagey Hollywood sort of creation. Well, I saw Return of the Jedi on its opening weekend. It was like a Memorial Day weekend. I remember going to see it. But by the time it came out, I was kind of I was older. So I was I was like a preteen going into being a teenager, and I think I had already found sort of more sort of like harder kind of sci-fi films, or more edgier sci-fi films, things like Blade Runner, things like The Thing, things like Alien. I think I might have even seen, maybe The Road Warrior was out by then, or at least Mad Max. So I kind of was moving away from the sort of more I don't want to say juvenile, but the more sort of crowd-pleasing sci-fi film that I guess that Star Wars represented. But still, I was very interested in seeing the film. I loved Star Wars. It was my whole childhood. So I did enjoy Return of the Jedi. I think my responses to the film were similar to other fans at the time, their responses. I really liked the parts with Jabba the Hutt. The beginning part I thought was really great. But the Ewok part, even when I was younger, I could still sense sort of products like this was merchandising heaven for Lucas. But again, it wasn't. I didn't think it was to the detriment of the film. But I could just tell that they would, this was some way to appeal to literal kids or to female fans, who they were trying to bring in and get to buy their wares. And then, of course, the fight against the Death Star, again, not as thrilling as the original one. You knew they were going to defeat, the Empire in this one. But the scenes with Luke and Darth Vader and the Emperor, again, were very highly dramatic. I think there were some really great scenes in that as well. The end of the film, I think, is a fitting ending. It's a nice ending, and everything sort of comes together in the end of the film. So, again, it's Return of the Jedi, I think, out of the three initial films, probably has the sort of the least... has the sort of least favor amongst fans, but I enjoyed it very much. But again, I think I was even saturated by that time. I mean, there was Star Wars TV shows on. There was you had the Ewok show, and you had the cartoons, and you had the TV show, the TV there was the TV movies about Ewoks. I remember my little sister was all into it. So I think by that time there had been such saturation of Star Wars, and I was also the age I was sort of getting out of that, wanting to see something that was a little bit more adult, maybe seeing a little bit more sophisticated. So I was kind of already getting out of that by that time. But again, it's a film I still enjoy to this day. I still very much enjoy it, you know. And again, maybe when I first saw it, my opinions might have been harsh, but, you know, not knowing what was going to be coming in terms of the prequels, in terms of the movies. If I knew that, I would have known that this movie was actually far superior than anything that would come after it.